Hi, I'm Bryony Billison and this is a Property Question Time development special. Joining me today we have a panel of experts. First of all, Evan Maindonald, co-founder and CEO of Melt Homes. Welcome. Rob Wilkinson, co-founder and director of Crowd With Us. And Thomas Knust, CEO of Horsesticks. Welcome to the three of you today. Now we've got a lot of questions to get through, so I'm going to go straight in with our first question to you, Evan. What would be your advice for someone starting out in property development right now?
So the market has changed since I started out in property development. I started doing property development in 2002, and one of the things I think that would be a good strategy in the market today is conversion of houses to small HMOs. The reason that it's a good strategy is that it's a way that you can buy a property, you can enhance the value of that property by converting it into an HMO, and if it's an HMO of under a certain size, and there isn't something called an Article 4 direction in force in that area, it's something you'd have to check, then you can convert that property to an HMO, you can enhance the value of it, and you can also increase the rental yield on that property. So what that would enable you to do is to do a development. It would enable you to restructure the finance on that property when you're finished and take out, if you get it right, the money that you've put in the first place, and then move on and use that money to do another similar development. And by doing that, you could build up a stream of rental properties and a stream of rental income, and also create a model that allows you to continue to do development. That would be my advice.
Oh, fantastic advice, thank you. I feel like a lot of people can sometimes be a bit hesitant about HMOs because there seems to be quite a big checklist of things you have to get done, but would you say that is still quite a good place to start for developers?
I think you need to be aware of what you're doing, and so I think if you're going to enter into anything to do with property development, it would help to team up with somebody who's done it before, who has a little bit of expertise. But as with any field of business, you need to research it and understand what the rules are before you get involved. But yes, you're right. There's a lot of regulation that applies to HMOs. That's not the only strategy that's out there. There are other ones. There are simpler ones. It's just, if you asked me what I would do if I was starting right now, that's what I would do.
Brilliant, thank you.
I'd probably add to that about Evan touched on it, but about education and training. I think before, especially in the current climate, before rushing into anything, as you would with stepping into any new industry, I'd do a lot of research into educating myself, how I can move forward, learn all the different techniques and strategies and whatnot. And there's lots of trainings out there that you can do. Just make sure that the people running the training courses have got a good calibre, that they've done what they're speaking about.
Brilliant.
It's true. Actually, there's a lot that you can learn on the internet today. I think when I started doing property development, the internet wasn't anything like it is. And so there are a lot of people who will talk about what they do on the internet that you can learn from. You can see what they're doing in terms of projects. We put a lot of content up on our own website and on social media about how we're doing, what we're doing, and we try and educate people and help them take those first few steps into development and investment. Sorry, Tom.
But for those people doing developments, a lot of people are doing residential development still. With residential developments, it's a lot more difficult nowadays. Especially right now, you've got to consider that perhaps property prices may drop another 10%. So anyone doing a residential development now has to factor in a 10% drop in the values and really have to look at developments really carefully now to make it work over the next 2 years. So very difficult times for residential developments.
And as such, you can never underestimate the power of a good mentor. There's a lot of experienced developers out there that may be cash rich but very time poor, and but they can also they can mentor you and help you along the way, so you can learn from their mistakes as opposed to making your own.
Brilliant, that's great advice. Never even thought of that. How would you go about getting a mentor in that sense?
I guess the best place to start is there's a lot of networking events, so attend them. You're going to get to meet developers in the scene. And ask them to meet up for a coffee or go and meet them on the building site.
Great.
Yeah, certainly when I started out, one of the things I wished I had been able to find is somebody who had more experience than me that I could work with. I did look, but I just couldn't find the right person. But I think the amount of property networking, and I think the way in which you can connect with people over the internet and social media today can make that a lot easier.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Fantastic start with that question there. My next question is going to go to you, Rob. It's about how much cash you need to get started. So how much liquid cash do you need to even consider becoming a developer?
Very, very interesting question. There's several different ways of looking at it. But if you were to go back to my point on the last question with regard to a JV partner, it's possible to enter into a development without any of your own cash at all. If you've got a good mentor, you've got a good relationship with an experienced developer, if you find a suitable project, you can take that to them, and they'll be able to hopefully fund that, and whilst a money for time exchange. Similarly, there's different ways of funding, such as working with JV partners, with other investors, crowdfunding platforms, etc.
Fantastic.
So,
S7.
actually, it is worth saying that there are lots of people out there who have money that they would like to invest in property, but maybe they don't have the time to do it. People tend to be time poor and cash rich, or the other way around. And so it may be that you already know somebody who has some cash that they'd like to put into property, but just doesn't have the time and attention to dedicate to doing it. And so sometimes it can be a good idea to team up with somebody else who has the opposite problem that you do. One of the first property investment or major property investments that I got involved with was with a guy in New Zealand, a friend of mine, a guy called Mike Woodward. He wanted to do some property development. He needed some cash. I had some cash. I needed somewhere to put it. And so we worked together, and actually we built up a string of about 20 investment properties in New Zealand over a period of 3 or 4 years. He used my cash and some backing from me for some of the things that we did. He did all the hard work, and at the end we split it between us, and it was very profitable for both of us.
Another way of looking at it is also what I would say if you're doing it on your own or with an investor. I would say you need about 50% of your purchase price in cash.
Okay.
If you can have 50% of your purchase price in cash, you can generally get away with borrowing the rest from banks. So as a rule of thumb, have 50% of the cash, and then you should be fine to get through the whole project without having to put too much more cash down of your own.
It's worth saying also that I think that rather than focusing on how much cash you need, focus on the quality of the project, the quality of the investment. If you have a good quality deal and it's well researched, and you can show that you've done your homework and that it's going to be profitable, you'll find investment for it.
You won't have any problem finding the cash.
Absolutely. So just focus on finding the deals and evaluating them and getting good quality deals, and the cash will follow.
I think that's really helpful advice. A lot of people, I think, can be frightened about making those first steps, particularly in property development. But like you say, if you've got a great project there and the quality's there, then you can find the funding, and perhaps you don't need as much as you might think to get started.
Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. My next question goes to you, Thomas. How much would you look to make on a deal?
Yes, well, ideally, you should look to make about 25% of GDV, which is of the value of the project, or you can look at it at 30% on the total cost of your project. You should be trying to make as profit.
Okay.
What you should expect to make minimum is 20% of your total cost. Because a lot of these projects, they might start out being profitable, but you've got certain other aspects like Section 106 and the councils and so on. They look to take a lot of the profit out of it and restrict you to 20% on cost. So expect to make 20% on cost, and if you can get anything else out of it, it's a bonus. But don't expect to make 30% on cost or 25% of GDV and expect it will be the same near the end of the project, because there are too many moving targets involved, especially when you're having to get Section 106 negotiations with the council. We just never know which way it's going to go.
And I wonder, following on from that, whether any of you have any advice on how to manage that level of uncertainty. We know there's a minimum perhaps that you wouldn't go for that project or that development if you weren't sure of your minimum return, but how can you find that confidence to go for it if there are so many variables with your returns?
Good due diligence.
Okay.
Yeah, you just
I was going to say, make sure that you've qualified and quantified all your numbers, that the comparables that properties you're using are from recent sales, that your build costs are from a quality surveyor, QS, quantity surveyor, and not from a project that you've done a couple of years ago because bill prices change, that you've got red book valuations so your GDV and everything has been qualified by a qualified surveyor.
Yeah, I very much echo what Rob's just said. It's all about making sure that you do your homework in advance, do your due diligence. So make sure that you know everything there is to know. And if you're uncertain about something, get somebody else in who's more experienced than you. Rob just mentioned quantity surveyors. I think one of the key things if you're starting out in development is to work with a good quantity surveyor. Quantity surveyors are very experienced. They're like accountants for building projects in a way. They understand costs better than anyone else does, but they also understand the things that you're likely to come across on a project because they have experience of working with lots of projects. And so what they can help you do is understand and draw out all of those things that you might come across. You can cost them in advance, and then you maximise the degree of certainty that you have. It's about rigorous risk management on the way in. Just make sure that you don't get involved in anything unless you know what all the costs are to a high degree of certainty at the outset, and also in terms of end values, what you've got a high degree of certainty, as Rob said, with market research. I think there's something else worth saying though, that in terms of reducing risk management, and that is about what you do with the project once you've acquired it. So you should look for a certain minimum level of profit. But actually what we do with our projects is we look to enhance the value of the sites that we buy through planning permission. So we'll look for sites that have a certain base level of profit, and we actually reduce risk by enhancing the end values of the properties we develop. So we increase the margin in the development by enhancing the value of them before we even start work on site.
Fantastic.
And very quickly, I think it's very good to use very conservative numbers, especially in the current climate, and always build in a contingency.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for, but don't go anywhere because we'll be back in a short break. Welcome back to Property Question Time Development Special with our expert panel with me today. We're going to go straight in with a question we've had from a viewer, and it's to you, Evan. She's asked, I'm about to start my first property development project, the conversion of a house into 3 flats. Do I need a contract with the builder?
My answer would be that you would be wise to have a contract with the builder. It's not absolutely essential, and I think the answer to some extent is probably around what type of contractor you're working with and how well you know that person. If you feel that you've got a good relationship and that's somebody you've known for some while and you can trust that person and the amount of work is relatively small or the value of the work is relatively small, then you could probably get away without having a contract. What you do certainly need to do is make sure that all of the costs are clear and agreed between you up front. I think in a very general sense, my advice would always be that a contract should be put into place. The form of contracts that are most often used in building contracts are JCT contracts, and you could put a JCT minor works contract into place for something if it's, say, less than £100,000. So yes, I'd say a contract would be fairly important. Do you guys have any thoughts on this?
Well, I would say, judging by that question, it would be probably a project £150,000 to £200,000.
Yeah.
And that could easily go wrong by 20%. So you could end up, having a £30,000 overrun. Even if you agree a quote from the builder, and from better experience, the builders still always go over the quote. And if you don't really have any penalty clauses in your contract, and they go over and they ask for more money, there's nothing you can do about it. You're stuck. You're at their mercy. So, but on the other hand, if you have to have a JCT contract or design and build contract with a builder, it does cost a lot of legal fees. You have to pay people to review it. The builders at that level are not that keen to spend all that time on a JCT contract. It can be quite time consuming. But for the sake of a 30k overrun, you will have to take the view and judge where you think your risk is, depending on how well you know the builder and how much you trust them.
I'd personally always have one in place through a previous experience. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a JCT, depending on again, if you're doing go back to the JV, if you're starting out with someone that you can turn to that's got experience, they can maybe provide you with a contract. But I think as a minimum, you should have a schedule of works, payment schedule, and as Thomas just touched on, cost and time overrun penalties, just so that everyone knows where they stand.
Fantastic. So you wouldn't say the cost of getting a contract put in place and the time that it will take to do, you shouldn't let that put you off getting one. You think the benefits outweigh that?
Personally, I would think so.
I think well, the one thing that a contract does is it clearly documents what's been agreed, and it forces you to go through that detail. But I do think it's worth bearing in mind that on a small job, that if you do end up getting into a dispute, the cost of that dispute could easily outweigh any savings you might make by being able to, you know, manage and control costs. One thing that I always say is there's no such thing as a fixed price contract. Anyone who calls something a fixed price contract, it just isn't. I mean, we signed a contract for £2.5 million worth of works on the development that we did in Gloucester, and it was a design and build contract with a guaranteed maximum price. And so you would think that guaranteed maximum price would mean there would be no variations. Well, there were variations, and they were about 5% of the value of the contract, and there always are. So I think you've got to weigh up maybe what the cost of enforcing that contract is, and if you get into arbitration or into a legal dispute with somebody, it's going to cost you a lot of money. So actually, in a way, that's what I was saying at the beginning. I think it's probably more important that you can trust the contractor you're working with, and you've got a good relationship with them. So that's really what I was angling at. I agree, it should be documented. But
I think it also depends how you're financing it as well, because the lender may insist on it as well.
Yeah, so that's absolutely true. If you've got development finance in place, your lender's going to insist on having a contract, without a doubt.
Fantastic, brilliant answers. Actually quite a complex question now we've delved a bit further into it. Thomas, another question. What is the best way to work out the costs on a development project? Quite a broad, difficult question to answer there, but any advice for our viewer here?
Well, I'll start from the beginning, and then we can just stop me if I go too far.
Go ahead.
First thing I would do, I would first get a set of drawings together. The first thing you want to do is work out your area space, the GIA, or the gross internal area, which means the internal space of your flats or your houses. Once you have your schedule of accommodation, it's called, which is your area that you're going to build, then you have something where you can start costing on it. Up to that time, you haven't got anything to work with.
Okay.
So once you've got that, then I would go to an architect in your local area, because the architects generally know what your build price per square foot is in that area. Now, the architects tend to be a little bit on the higher side, so at least you have a benchmark figure. And the architect will give you the benchmark figure, and then you know, okay, we can always work down from that a little bit. But it's a good benchmark figure as your worst case building cost scenario. Then once you've got that, then you can also at the same time go to builders. Builders can then quote on it. Once they know what your area schedule is, they can give you a quote on it. And then you then have to take a view between what the architect's price is and the builder's price. You then have to take a view in between where you are with that. And then if it's a big project, then you go to your quantity surveyor, or the person who's going to help you manage the project. And he's going to be the middleman between the architect and the builder and yourself. And then they can help you with another evaluation of the costings, where you can go into more detail as to whether there are any problems on the site, whether you have to spend extra money on sewers and groundworks and so on. And then you can start adjusting the costs there. But initially, just to get the basic price per square foot, that would be the process that you would start off, I think.
Fantastic. Yeah, brilliant advice. Thank you. And very, I could kind of picture that as you were explaining it every step of the way. So thank you. I think that would be really helpful for a lot of our viewers. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I thought that was really interesting. I don't ever ask architects for costings. I always go straight to a quantity surveyor, but I think it's actually a really good idea, because you're right, they'll tend to be on the, well, when I have had conversations about costs with architects, they tend to be a little bit on the high side. So I would always be going straight to my quantity surveyor. I work very closely with a QS, and I would start getting a pounds per square foot view based on those areas that you mentioned. And then very quickly, if we think we're going to go ahead with the project, I'd get into a detailed costing with quantities and rates so that we can see exactly what we think it's going to cost us.
The problem is it's okay to go to architects when it's slightly bigger build, I think. With the lower, smaller projects, I mean quantity surveyor, this kind of smaller project, you might not necessarily use a quantity surveyor. So then you can always use an architect.
True.
Instead.
No, it's a good point. I think the thing is, I guess because I work with a quantity surveyor all the time, I can just ring him up and say, look, what does it cost to build detached houses in Broadstairs or wherever it is I happen to be.
Great place to live.
So I've heard.
I would just add a little caveat to that depending on the size of the project, if you're doing something that's really quite small, you can actually walk around with your builder and you're going to create a schedule of works with him and you know what needs to be done. And you can go to a local builder's merchant and this is for much smaller projects, but they'll actually give you a costing of what it's going to cost.
It's a good point actually, and all a quantity surveyor does is they do that on a bigger scale. They're just used to doing it. They know what it costs per square metre to do brickwork. They know what it costs per square metre for carpet or for a foundation or really anything that goes into a build. And so in essence that's just a kind of the same process just on a different scale.
Thank you. 3 different but really helpful responses to that question, so thank you. We are going to move on to our final question before we run out of time. What approach would you advise a developer starting out to take to gaining planning permission? Perhaps, Evan, you could start us on that one.
Yeah, perhaps I could just reflect a little bit on my own experience. When I first started doing development, I took a very aggressive approach to planning permission, very pushy, and I think in retrospect it was the wrong approach. What I try to do now is take a very collaborative approach with the planners. I think it's important to recognise that the planning process is a consensus-driven process and that the planners aren't really involved in making decisions. They are to some extent, but essentially what their job is to put the application out to consultation and then make a decision based on the responses from the consultees. So actually in many ways it's more important what those responses that come in from the consultees are than necessarily what the planner's own personal opinion is. So he will form a view based on the information that he gets from other people, he or she gets from other people. And so if you can get those stakeholders on board with your application and make sure that the responses that come in are positive and generally supportive, then you're going to have a much greater chance of actually getting the planning permission that you want.
Thank you, a really honest answer there, thank you. Anything else?
I would say that to take a step back, because I think the question was how do you start the planning process? If you had no experience in the planning, I'd say make friends with a good planning consultant, and they're going to show you the ropes basically.
Yeah. Or an architect actually as well. You know, planning consultant. That mix of the planning consultant and architect really gives you all the skills you need: design plus understanding of the planning law.
But I find planning quite difficult personally. There's a lot involved and it's a specialized field, so I don't really want to learn everything about planning in detail myself, so I'd prefer to pay a planning consultant, and they are expensive, of course, you have to take that into consideration, but really starting with a planning consultant, then they guide you from day one. You don't end up making any mistakes or having to redo any steps.
On our previous projects, we actually had an arrangement with a planning consultant that we'd send them anything that came through, and the deal was they'd give us basically a feedback on the likelihood of, in their opinion, that it would be to go forward, and if it wasn't any good, then we wouldn't pay for them. But if we did decide to progress, then we'd engage them. So it was a good way of getting around that cost.
I think it's actually also worth adding that planning, with many aspects of development, is a very local thing. So I understand what the planning policy is in Gloucester very well, but if you took that and you moved that to Swindon, it would be completely different. You get some very odd things, like for example, in some parts of the country they insist on parking being included with developments. In central London, they insist on there being no parking. So you either get a situation where you're not allowed to have parking or you have to have parking. There's never anything in between. And so those policies are all down to the local planning authority, and so actually to really understand how to get planning, you really need to understand the policies of the area that you're working in, and it can take time to get to the bottom of that.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. But if you have a question you want answered by some of our property experts, then please email us info@propertytelevision.tv. And all that leaves is for me to thank you for coming in today and sharing all your experience and knowledge. It's been really interesting and valuable. Thank you very much. But thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon.